Welcome to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm Richard Nelson. Republican nominee for Governor Daniel Cameron has made his decision for the running mate of Lieutenant Governor. That's Robby Mills, state senator from Henderson. Mills is a fiscal and social conservative with a record of accomplishment in the state legislature. And joining us on the Matters program today is Senator Mills. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Richard. Glad to be here.
Hey, just full disclosure, you have been a friend of mine for several years, and we've worked together on issues in the past, and also we're one of the founding board members of Commonwealth Policy Center. So wanted to clear that up right at the beginning.
Yep.
Thank you.
I still claim you as a friend.
I'm proud, and I appreciate that. So, let's start with this. Robby, were you surprised when you got the call from General Cameron?
Sure. I was. To be honest with you, I was kind of locked in on being a state senator. Policy stuff. We're in the middle of our interim session and planning on what we're going to look at for 2024. And when he called, and I just thought, well, this may be an opportunity.
Yeah. You bring breadth, if you will, of experience. You're a social conservative with a long record of accomplishments on social issues in the state legislature. You're a fiscal conservative. You've got some bread and butter fiscal issues that you have led the way in the state legislature. But not only your legislative experience, and we'll go into further detail there, you served 8 terms in city government on the Henderson City Commission. You've run a small business, New Look Cleaners.
Yep.
It's the 3rd generation family business. Now it's your kids who are taking it over, or your son that's taking it over. Mm-hmm. So you bring this breadth of experience, but also you are a man of faith. Your faith shapes who you are and how you think through the issues. Mm-hmm. So were these some of the things that Attorney General Daniel Cameron was looking for?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably one of the biggest things that he was looking for was kind of a bridge between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And there's been a history lately of the executive branch not communicating with the legislative branch. And I think it hurts Kentucky as a whole when we have to tug a war in Frankfort as opposed to us talking, compromising, and moving forward. All these lawsuits and back and forth, just not the most efficient way to run our state government.
I've talked to several of your colleagues, including those in leadership, who said that they're saying it in more forceful terms, that there is no communication between the legislature and the governor's office.
I mean, I can tell you that I have not had a conversation with the governor except for coming into a press conference and shaking my hand.
Yeah. And of course, you are a leader. You chair the State and Local Government Committee.
I do.
In the Senate, where important bills go through,
Mm-hmm.
Which we'll go to that. Well, let's talk about some of your legislative accomplishments. One of those bills that you'd shepherded through back during COVID, it was 2020 or 2021. It was the bill that required voter ID at the polls.
Yep.
I remember actually being in committee with you, listening to testimony and listening to the rationale for that bill. You were harshly criticized as trying to disenfranchise people from voting, maybe poor people that didn't have a driver's license or something like that. You did come to a workaround.
We did.
But there was a real need for voter IDs at the polls, wasn't there?
There is. I mean, it's, to me, you show your license everywhere to prove who you are. If you're buying ammunition, if you're buying, if you're cashing a check at the bank, you always have to show your ID. Why not do it when we're voting? I mean, it's a sacred privilege that we have as a citizen. Why it's not much skin off your nose to just say, here, this is my ID. We did do a workaround too for folks that do not have a driver's license, that they can get a free state ID card, and that was our compromise. There were other compromises too, that we allowed a couple more different types of photo IDs as well. So it's common sense, but I think a liberal mind might say, come up with all kinds of different excuses why they think it's, not fair. But I would say that now it's probably a 75% issue statewide that people agree you should have to show an ID.
And of course, that bill had bipartisan support
it did.
in the House and Senate, and it passed handily.
It did.
Some of the other legislation that you've led the way on, the ban on TikTok on state devices, this was because the Chinese government had access to this and they could misuse information of the users. The Fairness in Women's Sports Act, you were the lead sponsor on Senate Bill 83 last year. It kept boys off of girls' sports teams. Pro-life legislation, you are pro-life.
I am.
And you led on the Chemical Abortion Reporting Act just a few years ago. You were the lead sponsor there. As it is, there are no abortion clinics open in Kentucky, and the unborn are protected in
they
law.
are. You know what's interesting on that, just how the abortion landscape has changed since that bill. You know, when we passed Senate Bill 50, I think it's 3 years ago, it was like 30% of abortions were chemical abortions. Now it's well over 70%. I mean, it's the main way that Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers are, and it's really sad that, you know, young ladies are aborting their child at home by themselves.
Now, you have been involved with pro-life ministries back in Henderson, your hometown. There's an organization called Marcia's Place that you have supported. You've been involved with their banquets and sponsored tables.
My mom and
that
wife have been on the board for over 30 years.
Good ministry.
It is.
ESG, that was a hot topic this last session. You led on a bill, House Bill 236. It keeps state pension funds from being invested for ESG reasons, and it mandates that the investment decisions should be based on risk and rewards instead of ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, which are progressive benchmarks. And when it comes into investing, your concern was that when it comes to the state pension, they weren't prioritizing what is the best return on investment.
ESG funds, which, you know, a large majority of investment funds now have some ESG requirements in it, but it's proven that ESG funds do not perform at a rate that non-ESG funds perform at. You know, when we have a pension system that's struggling, when we're putting billions of dollars a year into the pensions fund, we need to have our pensions performing at the highest rate that they can. ESG funds are not those high rates. They take a liberal ideology and apply it to the workings of these companies that they're investing in, and it's just not a prudent way to invest our state pension funds.
Robby, you led the way with legislation that provided disaster relief funds after tornadoes devastated several communities in West Kentucky. Some of those communities in your Senate District, Senate District 4, it provided that school aid will be used for repair damages to schools, such services as after-school programs, mental health counseling, and transportation for displaced students. Part of your district is Dawson Springs.
It is.
That's your opponent's hometown or family of
hometown.
origin.
Yes.
He's not from there, but
I believe his
he has
dad
roots.
was born there.
That's right. That has been in the news. The disaster relief fund has been in the news because Treasurer Allison Ball found that there were checks going out to people that were not affected by the tornadoes or the flooding in eastern Kentucky. Is this an issue of concern that this disaster relief fund, which was, by the way, it's just citizens who donated to this fund, about $52 million were put into this fund. Was that an issue of concern, or have you heard from constituents on that?
It is. Two different things on that. So the Western Kentucky Safe Funds are general fund dollars that we put out for cities and counties, schools to be able to use to rebuild their city. One of the biggest things they used this money for was debris removal pickup. Hopkins County had almost $10 million worth of expenses for just debris pickup. Those are actually a pickup. That is actually a bill that FEMA will pay for, but not for a year and a half. So they're left financing this huge dollar amount, and that's where we gave money to the counties and cities to pay that bill and kind of float them so they can continue on, operating their, in their community. The second fund was the Teen Kentucky Fund, which Andy Beshear actually raised money for, and it was private donations. those are the funds that, in my opinion, probably should have not been collected by state government. They probably should have allowed a nonprofit to collect those donated monies and allow a nonprofit to disperse them for human needs. They came through some kind of FEMA mailing list that gave $1,000 check to a lot of people, and some of the people that received those checks didn't have damage.
It was about 200
There's
people.
about 200 so far that we know of. Of course,
Right.
a lot of people get a check like that and may just stick it right in the bank account.
Right.
So I think we could have done better on those funds, and I think if a nonprofit was collecting them, it would have been easier and more accountability there.
Are you in favor of the audit? The state legislative investigative oversight committee asked Mike Harmon, state auditor, to audit that fund. Is that something you're in favor of?
Absolutely. Ultimately, the General Assembly, we are the appropriators of funds, and if it's coming into state government and it's being spent, we should have the ability to at least have some questions answered.
Now, Andy Beshear is pushing back and saying that this is grossly political, that there's a conflict of interest since Mike Harmon ran in the GOP primary for governor, that he cannot be unbiased in this. How do you respond? Is this political? Is that a fair response at the governor's?
I know Mike Harmon. And he always says he's going to follow the data.
Yeah.
I think he's going to follow the data on this. But the truth is that Andy Beshear has been out in the tornado-ravaged areas in eastern Kentucky and the flooding areas, and he has made those two unfortunate natural disasters political too. So,
handing out checks regularly, of
Absolutely.
course, and that's the role of the governor. You want to get the support from the governor. You want to have him bring in resources, but there is a fine line there somewhere, isn't there?
There is.
So speaking of Andy Beshear, after you were announced as Daniel Cameron's running mate, Governor Beshear slammed you and Daniel Cameron. He said this: "My opponent's first major campaign decision is to pick a lieutenant governor candidate who helped lead the charge to enact Matt Bevin's plan to slash pensions for our teachers, police, and firefighters. That couldn't be further from my values and the values of Kentuckians." So you were in favor. What he's referring to was the pension reform bill under Governor Matt Bevin's leadership. Was the intention to slash pensions of educators, law enforcement officers, and other government employees?
No. Just the opposite. We were trying to save the pensions. When we came, the Republican supermajority came into the legislature, we were handed a huge bill, $43 billion deficit in our pensions. We were faced with trying to make some decisions and correct. And before explaining more, just obviously, to state the obvious. Daniel Cameron's wife's a teacher. My niece is a teacher. My mother was a teacher. We are pro-teacher. We know the things that they are going through in the classroom, how tough it is to teach these days. We are pro-teacher, and we want our teachers to know that, as well as law enforcement. I think Daniel has bent over backwards to make sure that he is talking with law enforcement agencies and listening to them, and we are pro-law enforcement. But back on pensions, we had to take 3 or 4 bites at the apple, and there was probably, the first bite was a little aggressive, and the second bite kind of got us to where we needed to be. But ultimately, this affected new employees coming in, not current employees.
Right.
So that's one of the things that opposition usually fails to say, is that we did not take money from anyone or anyone's pension. These pension changes affected new employees. We were actually able, the last 6 years, like I said, over $1 billion of contributions just to teachers' pensions, another $1 billion per year to all the other pensions. So that's our number one commitment in the legislature, is to pay our pension obligations. So I'm happy where we ended up on pensions. We actually have been complimented by the Retired Teachers Association the last 2 or 3 years, saying thank you for saving our pensions. Now, you don't hear that news.
I've not heard that
you
news
don't hear
reported.
That news,
This is the
but
first
it comes,
time.
It comes in a letter every year from the Retired Teachers Association, and they're thanking us for the work that we did. So I feel good about that and how we're moving forward on the pension issue.
So you were involved with that, but you're saying that what the governor is charging you with was not accurate. Many of the mainstream news outlets did not report that.
Right.
Going back to your legislative record, though, many of these bills that you've led on have been caricatured by the far left media as being anti-women. I think of pro-life legislation that's interpreted as anti-women. Think of the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, which requires you're trying to save women's sports.
Yes.
That's called anti-trans is the term. Senate Bill 150, you were very involved with that battle, which kept minors from using hormones that would alter their body chemistry. It also prevented gender mutilation surgery. You were called opposing gender-affirming care. So here's my question regarding your legislative history and issues you've dealt with and how the media portrays it. How do you overcome that where it's not even starting the argument or the reporting in the center, but it's with a far left bias? How do you address that? I mean, in your personal, as you're working through legislation, do you have a way to, because quite frankly, most of the media in Kentucky is on the political left.
I think on these issues, on these culture issues, you just kind of start knowing that you're going to be, misrepresented, and you start behind the eight ball, I guess, and you just kind of mentally prepare yourself for that. But truthfully, outside the media, I get a lot of people that thank me privately, via social media or whatever, saying thank you for standing up for our values. We say the values that we're working for: faith, family, and community, or faith, family, and freedom. Those are the things that Kentuckians believe in, and that's what Cameron Mills' administration is going to be working for.
Let's talk about faith. Governor Andy Beshear often talks about God. He quotes scripture. He talks about his faith and how important it is to him. And yet you and he are on different sides of the political spectrum. Why is that?
Well, I mean, obviously we know that there are Christians on liberal and conservative side, but my approach to my faith is really to show my faith in actions and not in words. I think sometimes words can be hollow and empty if they're not followed by actions. And so I like to let my actions speak for what I believe.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but what would be some examples of that? How are you letting your faith be known by your actions?
Well, I think by serving in the legislature, we all folks that are in the legislature and in public service, it is a call. There is a cost to your family and to your time and all of that. But we feel called. I feel called to be in this place. God tells us to be salt and light, and the other side definitely doesn't keep their opinions and their belief out of the public arena. And I think that the call is for us to bring our faith and our concerns to the public arena. And the public arena in Frankfort is a big public arena, and there's plenty of room for everybody. But I just feel called to be here and talk about values that I think are important.
So let's talk, if I could dig into one of the highest profile bills across the country, not just in Kentucky, but also one of the most controversial bills, and that was Senate Bill 150. This banned what the left calls gender-affirming care, what the political right says are hormone therapy and gender surgical interventions of minors. It stops gender-preferred pronouns in schools. It requires school boards to have a bathroom policy that corresponds with biological sex. It gets rid of LGBT curriculum out of all of the schools. No gender ideology, no sexual orientation curriculum, and it requires parental permission as well. Now, using this issue, which did pass over Governor Beshear's veto, to kind of push into faith a little bit, Robby. Your faith, and I know this from private conversations we've had, compelled you to be in favor of this bill. Andy Beshear's faith said that no, I can't favor this because these are all God's children. We need to affirm those young people who identify with the opposite sex. How would you approach it at that? Again, I think both of you, what I'm getting at is I think both of you care about children. Mm-hmm. You're just approaching this from a little different angle. And I think, just to add to this, I think one of the troubling aspects of dealing with difficult social issues today is that accusations fly fast and furious that you're imposing your values, or you really don't care, or you're trying to hurt somebody. And in fact, this is what I'm looking at, a statement from Lieutenant Governor Jackie Coleman, who says that this bill is cruel and it is already marginalizing an already marginalized set of young people, that is government overreach. She's very, very critical. But tell us, if you would, how your faith would speak to this issue of children who are gender dysphoric, if you could.
It's a loaded question, but I think that I think the Republican majority's position on this is about the child. We do care about the child, mm-hmm. and we think that there are situations where what they're calling gender affirming care, where it is an abusive situation. Yeah. That these drugs and surgeries are abusive, mm-hmm. and we do not believe that children should be put through that. We believe that if somebody chooses to do that after they're 18 and they're quote unquote an adult, then that's another thing. But we're standing up for the child, and I do not believe we're imposing our values. We're looking at it from the child's aspect. Yeah. It is a narrow road here between parental rights and standing up for an abusive situation. But I see this as abuse, and we don't want it to happen in Kentucky.
Thank you for explaining that, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, you're good.
But I think that this is one of those things where the state already is intervening in saying that parental rights have limits.
Yes.
The authority of a child to make their own decision has its own limits. We have laws on tattoos. You cannot get one until you're 18. Children can't drink alcohol or use tobacco until they're an adult. They can't drive a car till they're 16.
Tanning bed.
So that's right. So there are a lot of different restrictions that you're placing because of the well-being of the child.
That's right.
So that is a big issue. The status, by the way, is that District Court Judge David Hale has stopped his stay. There was a stay he put on Senate Bill 150, and because of the U.S. Sixth Circuit Court ruling, he lifted that stay, and Senate Bill 150 is in full effect right now. However, there are school boards across the state that are considering not implementing Senate Bill 150. Is this something you've given thought of? Actually, Covington, Lexington, and Jefferson County Public School boards are considering not implementing the full bill.
Yes. Senate Bill 150 was so massive, and the even most controversial part of it, we're missing out on some of the really good stuff that was inside of 150 that has to do with parental rights, has to make sure that parents get notification, puts in a procedure that if they want to challenge some materials and books, that was in a bill that we passed as well. Yeah. So that there are some very good things that happen in 150 that gives parents an equal standing in knowing about what's going on in their children's education, much more than they had last year. So very happy overall with Senate Bill 150. It probably would have been easier for the public to understand if it would have been in a couple of different bills, but it all ended up, the way it ended up passing was all together right at the end of the session.
Sure. What is it, Robby, that you, in a broad sense, we talked about your diversity, but what do you bring to the ticket besides your diverse background of local government experience, state legislative experience, business background, involved with your church and in the faith community? What else do you bring, particularly that's missing, that you see missing in the Beshear administration?
Yeah, I think that even though I've been a legislator and been on the city council, I bring real world experience. I feel like that I being a businessman, I understand what it takes to meet a payroll and all the things that
Yeah.
folks struggle with. But once again, I think the biggest thing missing in the Beshear administration versus what we would have in Cameron Mills administration is communication with the legislature. We will not operate in a silo. We will be asking and collaborating and compromising to where we can work along with the legislature. I think people want to see that, and I think we'll have better legislation. Ultimately, it'll be better for Kentucky.
Is that a role that you would play as a liaison between the executive branch and the legislative branch?
Absolutely. The lieutenant governor really doesn't have a lot of written responsibilities. The job is, to assist the governor and to do special projects, whatever the governor would like us to do. But Daniel has told me specifically that's what he wants me to focus on. And the first week of the campaign, I've been asking legislators, what do we need to do to make Kentucky better? And been trying to communicate and open up lines with everyone.
One thing I neglected to say is that part of your 4th Senate District contains coal production.
It does.
And that's a big issue for Kentucky. How does that play in the governor's race?
Well, I think, the energy independence issue is a huge issue. We could have a whole segment on that as, in itself. I think we're barreling toward blackouts and brownouts as on a regular
in
occasion.
Kentucky,
in Kentucky,
where we have fossil-rich resources here.
We have 300 years of coal underneath our feet, and because of some, environmental ideology that is pulling us away from coal and wanting us to reach unattainable scrubbing limits on coal and gas, and encouraging executives and utility companies to switch off of fossil fuel and go to renewables, we're going to have a major problem. The problem is here's an example. We've shut down 11 fossil fuel plants units in Kentucky in the last 3 years. We've only replaced 2. So, we are relying on the grid, quote unquote, the grid, and the grid is running out of power. And it will affect every aspect of our life and lifestyle in Kentucky in the next 15 years. If we can act and we can do what we can to keep coal-fired generation going, stable, and make it more reliable, if we act and have some help from the federal government.
Okay.
It's not too late.
Robby, we are out of time. Do you have 30 seconds to tell the voters about why they should vote for the Cameron Mills ticket?
Well, I think that we've talked here for the last 30 minutes, and I'm excited about Daniel Cameron. I think he brings some optimism to the state of Kentucky that's so desperately needed. I think Daniel has worked hard in the Attorney General's office. He's made hard decisions. He's done what he thinks is right, and I'm just really proud of the work that he's done. He's backed up the legislature's work. He's been very busy in court pushing back on Biden regulations. All those things have prepared him for the tough decisions that lie ahead for him in the governor's office. Daniel Cameron will be good for Kentucky. His optimism is definitely needed.
Very good. Senator Robby Mills and Lieutenant Governor, running mate with Daniel Cameron, thank you so
Thanks,
much
Richard.
for joining us, and best wishes to you.
Thank you so much.